Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land, we're here for you. I'm Ladar Gavelazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
We open with security incidents in Samaria, with terrorist shootings overnight in Nablus and Hawara, and an attempted rocket fire from Jenin. Terrorists opened fire targeting a passing military vehicle overnight that was safeguarding Jewish worshippers at Joseph's tomb in Nablus. IDF soldiers opened fire, wounding one of the gunmen, who was arrested. The army confiscated an M16 rifle, improvised explosives, and a grenade. Separately, a Palestinian terrorist was wounded by Israeli gunfire during clashes that broke out in Hawara. Terrorists reportedly opened fire on Israeli forces operating in the area, who returned fire. Earlier, IDF troops entered Jenin after receiving reports of an attempted rocket launch toward Israel attempted by Hamas. The army located remnants of the rocket and its launching pad. The army is now searching for the terrorist who carried out the attempted attack. The Hamas-affiliated terror group, the Ayash Brigade, took credit for attempting the launch from an industrial zone in the Jenin area. They admitted that the plan was to target the Israeli settlement of Shaked in northern Samaria. Expert sappers gathered evidence to determine the level of explosive materials in the rocket. The latest launch attempt adds to a series of unsuccessful rocket launches from the Jenin area toward Jewish communities. Most rockets fired have fallen within Palestinian territory. The rockets have largely failed to explode or fallen harmlessly.
In a tragic turn of events, 20-year-old IDF soldier Hillel Nechemia Ufan died during a training exercise. The IDF is still investigating the cause of his death, and his funeral was held at 5 p.m. today at the military cemetery on Mount Herzl. In a heartbreaking incident during the ongoing heat wave, a 20-year-old IDF soldier died during a training exercise between Sunday and Monday. The soldier, identified as Hillel Nechemia Ufan from Kametzur, was undergoing training as an engineer combat soldier in the Yalom unit. Due to the extreme weather conditions caused by the heat wave, the training session had been postponed, allowing the soldiers to rest during daylight hours. However, regulations within the IDF permitted a reassessment of the situation at 10 p.m. on Sunday. And so by midnight early on Monday, the decision was made to resume the training drills. Tragically, during the drill, while Ufan and his fellow soldiers were engaged in a crawling exercise across open fields, he faced a distressing situation. His direct commander rushed to assess the situation, attempted initial first aid, and promptly called for medical assistance. The exact cause of Ufan's tragic death remains uncertain. The IDF confirmed that no pre-existing medical conditions were detected. Although the training was resumed amidst the heat wave, the IDF claimed that the temperature had lowered to an acceptable level by midnight. The IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi stated that a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding Ufan's death will take place. In light of this devastating incident, all infantry training has been temporarily halted until 5 a.m. on Wednesday. Hezbollah terrorist leader Hassan Nasrallah made a blustery warning to Israel, saying if there is a war in Lebanon, Israel too will go back to the Stone Age. These words by Nasrallah come amid a series of Hezbollah provocations on the Lebanese border, and Steve Leibovich has more.
In recent months, Hezbollah has carried out a series of provocations on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. Nasrallah's remark was in apparent response to Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's comment while touring the northern border last week. Gallant told Nasrallah, "Do not make a mistake. If an escalation or conflict develops, Israel will return Lebanon to the Stone Age." Speaking from his bunker in Beirut, marking the 17th anniversary of the end of the Second Lebanon War in 2006, Nasrallah said this.
لذلك أنا أقول لهذا العدو اليوم أستطيع أن أقول له بالدليل والبرهان أنتم أيضا سيتم إعادتكم إلى العصر الحجري. إذا بتروحوا على الحرب مع لبنان.
Nasrallah also offered his opinion on the internal situation in Israel, saying that a law that would exempt ultra-Orthodox Jews from the army would be a major blow to the Israeli army, and that the IDF is in the worst condition it's ever been in. The highly divisive Haredi draft bill is due to be considered at the start of the fall session of the Knesset, with IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi struggling to maintain unity in the ranks. Halevi is criticized by some coalition members as being soft on reservists for refusing to serve due to judicial reform protests. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant swiftly defended Halevi in a tweet, praising him as one of the most excellent officers that I've ever met in my years in the IDF and security establishment.
A three-day Arab summit was held in El Alamein between the leaders of Egypt, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority, with potential Israeli-Saudi normalization topping the agenda. More from ILTV's William Sharon.
The issue of possible normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia was a central topic in yesterday's meeting in Egypt between President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Jordan's King Abdallah, and Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas. The three leaders met in the Egyptian coastal city of El Alamein. During the meeting, the leaders discussed what was called the development of the Palestinian cause. While there was no mention of the potential Israeli-Saudi normalization in the official statement, a Palestinian official told the media it was a key topic on the table. The Arab leaders reportedly discussed the U.S. efforts to achieve normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel and the Palestinian requirements in the framework of signing such a deal. Last weekend, Saudi Arabia announced that it has named the ambassador to Jordan as the ambassador extraordinary to the state of Palestine and the consul general in Jerusalem. Foreign Minister Eli Cohen rejected the notion, telling Israel National News, "Israel does not allow any country to open a consulate in Jerusalem. Therefore, we did not authorize this for any country, and we will not allow this in the future." Cohen went on to describe the Saudi announcement as a lip service to the Palestinians to assure them they were not forgotten in the negotiations with the U.S. and Israel. "We proved in the Abraham Accords as well as the Palestinian issue is not a roadblock to peace. This is not a central issue in the negotiations, and therefore I think we could reach a solution in this matter as well while keeping our ideology," says Cohen.
In the midst of rising tensions and evolving diplomatic landscapes in our region, we're now joined by Brigadier General in the Reserves, Amir Avivi, to wrap up all the latest security updates. Amir, let's start with Lebanese terrorist leader Hassan Nasrallah. His threatening comments come after a series of provocations. Are we potentially on the brink of a conflict?
I don't think we're on the brink of conflict. I think that Nasrallah in his talk didn't show any motivation to go into war. He mentioned a lot the second Lebanese war. From his perspective, of course, he's presenting it as a win. He talked about something interesting. He talked about the change in the doctrine in Israel after 2006 and the huge buildup of air defense and the IDF investing really much more on the defensive side. The way he looks at it is that this diminishes supposedly the ability of the IDF to really operate in an offensive way. So he's building on this change and thinks that maybe the IDF will have difficulty to operate. He mentioned also the tensions with the Christian leadership and community in Lebanon, and threatened not to lead Lebanon into a civil war, as we saw in the past. So we can definitely see that Hezbollah leader is very worried about the tensions inside Lebanon. And in this reality, he can really not afford any war.
Yes, Amir, another thing Nasrallah commented on is the Israeli Haredi draft law. It appears that the internal divisions in Israel are being pretty much exploited by our enemies.
So definitely they see it as a sign of weakness. And this is a strong message to all these reservists who are politicizing the army. This is really endangering Israel. We must keep the army outside of any political discussion. We cannot agree to a reality where reservists involve the army in politics and say they're not going to volunteer or serve in reserve anymore. This needs to change. We see our enemies looking at it, hoping and feeling that we are getting weak. Nasrallah also mentioned the threats Israel made, especially the Minister of Defense, that said that will bring Lebanon back to the Stone Age. And he said, this is exactly what we can do to you. And he mentioned the missiles project and the ability of Hezbollah to hit precisely airports, whether it's the civilian airport or the military Air Force bases. So this is something that he mentioned specifically. And we must say that the IDF is operating all the time, around the clock, trying to prevent this build-up of capability of missiles, precise missiles, in the hand of Hezbollah.
Of course, Amir. Now, turning to Egyptian President al-Sisi, hosted Jordanian King Abdallah and PA leader Abbas for talks mostly focused on the potential Israeli-Saudi normalization. Are they looking for the Palestinians to be included in the potential deal?
I think that it's the American administration that is really pushing very hard to include the Palestinians. I don't think that on the Saudi side, this is the major issue. Of course, they need to show publicly that they are doing something for the Palestinians. But really, when you talk to the leadership of the Saudi, there is two things that really are in their main focus. One is Iran, and they need American assurances that they will be kept safe from any possible Iranian aggression, and also that the US will be proactive in preventing Iran from becoming nuclear. And the other thing that is not much talked about, but maybe it's even a bigger threat than Iran for Saudi Arabia, this is Sunni radicalism. This is the rise of ISIS again after the withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's Al-Qaeda and all these groups that might challenge the Saudi regime in the future. And this is something that within time we'll need to talk more about as their forces are getting stronger again after the Russian withdrawal from Syria and the American withdrawal from Afghanistan.
I assume we'll have a whole separate session about that. Amir, thank you so much for joining us today.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came out firmly against a tentative deal announced over the weekend between the United States and Iran. According to the agreement, Washington will release several $1 billion in frozen Iranian assets in exchange for 5 American prisoners. And ILTV's Steve Leibovich reports.
Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel opposes any deal with Iran that does not include the dismantlement of its nuclear program, arguing that the funds Tehran receives will be funneled to militias. Vacationing in the north, Netanyahu's statement said arrangements that do not dismantle Iran's nuclear infrastructure will not stop its nuclear program, but will provide funds to terrorist elements sponsored by Iran. The tentative agreement appears to be moving forward, and the American prisoners have already been moved to house arrest.
So this is a positive step, but I don't want to get ahead of its conclusion because there's more work to be done to actually bring them home. My belief is that this is the beginning of the end of their nightmare.
The date for the ultimate release of both the American prisoners and the unfreezing of the funds remains unclear, but U.S. and Iranian officials said they believe the agreement could be completed by mid to late September. The deal came together after months of indirect negotiations between the U.S. and Iranian officials. Details of the money transfer involved Qatar, which mediated the talks. The amount going from Seoul to Iran could be anywhere from $6 billion to $7 billion, depending on exchange rates. The cash represents money South Korea owed Iran, but had not yet paid for oil purchased before the Trump administration imposed sanctions in 2019. The U.S. maintains that once in Qatar, the money will be held in restricted accounts and will only be able to be used for humanitarian goods such as medicine and food.
Iran's own funds would be used and transferred to restricted accounts such that the monies can only be used for humanitarian purposes, which, as you know, is permitted under our sanctions. There's an exemption for humanitarian that's there from the start. we will continue to enforce all of our sanctions.
In a related development, Iran is reportedly slowing some nuclear enrichment, diluting some of its nearly weapons-grade stockpile. The Wall Street Journal says that Tehran has watered down some materials enriched to 60%.
Clashes today between border police and Israeli residents when officers arrived to evacuate the illegal outpost of Va'ir HaShachar. Much of the tiny outpost was evacuated. The move was backed by Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich after it was determined that the site was privately owned by Arab land. More from ILTV's William Sharon.
A large force of border police and IDF civil administration personnel today entered the unauthorized Benjamin outpost and destroyed many of the structures. There were clashes and arrests reported at the site between residents and security forces. Settlers burned tires and scattered spikes on the road to try to stop the effort. Officials from the civil administration, backed by police, destroyed or evacuated 5 buildings in Va'ir HaShachar outposts near the settlement of Kochav HaShachar. The order to evacuate and destroy the outposts were approved by Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, despite his pro-settlement stance and advocacy for the legalization of outposts. In this case, it was determined that the land on Va'ir HaShachar was definitely private Palestinian land, and legalizing the site was not an option.
And joining us now is Gil Huffman from Honest Reporting and former political reporter for the Jerusalem Post. Hi, Gil. Netanyahu and Gallant spoke out in defense of the IDF chiefs. Will the members of the coalition now tune it down?
Steve, no. The more extreme members of the coalition have been given carte blanche by Netanyahu to attack the chief of staff of the IDF. And they're right now fighting a battle over public opinion in Israel. The prime minister does not want the people of Israel to think that Israel has been weakened by his own judicial overhaul plans, whereas the heads of the army, Shin Bet Mossad, are dealing day in and day out with their own fighters who don't want to serve a country that they believe is changing. And this is a battle over the narrative, and it's going to keep on getting more and more intense.
Gil, Gallant has been defending his officers. Netanyahu was a little bit slow. What's going on right now in terms of leadership?
Well, Gallant is the defense minister. It's his job to represent the army to the government and to represent the government to the army, and he has a balancing act because many of the Likud supporters who will decide whether Gallant will advance politically after this government are strong supporters of the overhaul plan. But he has to keep his army together, does not want to be seen as a person that presided over it coming apart. Netanyahu has on his shoulders the international community that's pressured him not to go too far. The credit agencies have told him to act only by consensus. And then he's got thorns at his side, whether it's more extreme or right-wingers in his government or his own son, Yair Netanyahu, who shared a post that criticized the chief of staff of the army earlier this week.
Gil, as far as you can tell, what are the current plans of Netanyahu vis-a-vis judicial reform? Where are we going?
Well, first of all, we can try to figure it out based on what he says, which is sometimes an indicator of what he'll do and sometimes not. He says that he'll move forward by consensus on every issue from now on, and that the only step he's going to actually implement is the makeup of the Supreme Court. Well, the opposition isn't going to cooperate with him on the makeup of the Supreme Court, certainly not until after the Supreme Court makes decisions about what has already been passed, the reasonableness clause that the Knesset voted to remove just a couple months ago. More decisions coming up about the power of the Supreme Court and whether the current selection committee needs to already start meeting. All this is going to be decided next month by the Supreme Court. Until then, everything is really on hold. And if Netanyahu gets a slap in the face by the court, if there's a constitutional crisis, then his hands will be tied when it comes to changing the makeup of that court.
All right, Gil, thank you for that.
Always good to be with you, Steve. Thank you.
Good news for consumers. Inflation in Israel has dropped significantly. Now we are among the lowest in the Western world. The Consumer Price Index rose by 0.3% in July, but annual inflation has dropped significantly from 4.2% last month to just 3.3% currently. Prime Minister Netanyahu took a victory lap.
עוד חדשות טובות לכלכלת ישראל. האינפלציה יורדת. מחירי הדיור צומחים. האבטלה 3.3, כמעט התוצאה הטובה ביותר בעולם המערבי.
According to figures released by the Central Bureau of Statistics, the high interest rate set by the governor of the Bank of Israel has managed to keep inflation in check. Prices of fruits and vegetables rose by 3.4% and transportation prices rose slightly, but clothing and shoe prices dropped by 4.8% and furniture prices dropped by 1.2%. Housing prices dropped by 0.2% relative to April and May, and the prices of new apartments are down by 0.6%. Over the past 16 months, the Bank of Israel has sharply raised the interest rates from 0.1% to 4.75% to battle the mounting inflation.
Under intense heat wave with relief still days away and amidst record global temperatures, experts warn of escalating climate crisis impacts. Israel is experiencing another intense heat wave with soaring temperatures and humidity levels sweeping across the nation. As the weekend progresses, temperatures are anticipated to climb further, although some scattered showers may offer temporary relief. While Monday might provide a slight reduction in the heat, significant relief is only expected towards the end of the week. Recent data from the European Climate Monitoring Organization has confirmed that July has set a new record as Earth's hottest month. This is the unusual global average temperature for July, surpassed the previous record set in 2019 by a significant margin. The consequences of these escalating temperatures are profound, leading to more frequent and severe extreme weather events. Deadly heat waves have struck regions like the southwestern United States, Mexico, Europe, and Asia. This July global temperature anomaly of 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels underscores the urgency of global efforts to limit long-term warming. The record-breaking trend observed in July is not just an isolated occurrence, but highlights the broader shifts in our climate. The month's average temperature exceeded the norm by 0.7 degrees Celsius or 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit, with ocean temperatures also reaching new highs. Israel is carefully watching developments and is ready to carry out new extractions if needed from war zones in Ethiopia. And on Thursday evening, Israel rescued some 200 citizens and local Jews eligible for Aliyah. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovich.
Israel extracted some 200 citizens and local Jews from conflict zones in Ethiopia amid heavy fighting in the African country's northern Amhara region. According to a statement by the Prime Minister's office, Israel rescued 174 Israelis and Ethiopians eligible to immigrate from the city of Gondar in Amhara, home to thousands of Ethiopians waiting for permission to move to Israel.
מדינת ישראל דואגת לאזרחיה באשר הם. בימים האחרונים נכנסו אזרחי ישראל וזכאי עלייה באתיופיה למצוקה באזורי הקרבות. הנחיתי להוציא אותם משם.
Another 30 Israelis were rescued from Amhara's capital city of Bahir Dar. 4 flights brought the evacuees to Addis Ababa, from where those immigrating to Israel will travel on to the Jewish state.
אני רוצה להודות למועצה לביטחון לאומי, לאנשי משרד ראש הממשלה ומשרד החוץ, לאנשי הסוכנות, על פעולה מהירה, שקטה, מעל הכל מוצלחת. האנשים עכשיו בדרכם מגונדר לאדיס, משם הם יגיעו למדינת ישראל. נקבל אותם כאן בחום ובברכה. ברוך הגעתכם למדינת ישראל.
Foreign Minister Eli Cohen said the Israelis will stay in the Ethiopian capital until deciding on whether to return home or remain in the country.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. See you next week.